Nick Barnes offers second chance to single mother. When he saw her relief, he fell into tears. The unexpected encounter. The hum of the city was a constant, low thrum against the glass of Nick Barnes's office, a sound he'd grown accustomed to, a testament to the empire he'd built from nothing. From his perch on the 20th floor of the Barnes Innovations building, the sprawling urban landscape looked like a complex circuit board, each glowing window a tiny, vital component. Nick, a man in his late 40s with a sharp mind and a surprisingly gentle demeanor, ran a tech company that had revolutionized urban logistics. His success was undeniable, but beneath the polished exterior of the CEO, a quiet humility lingered, a ghost of the hungry, desperate kid he once was. He remembered the gnawing fear of eviction, the cold bite of an empty stomach, the shame of worn-out shoes. Those memories, though distant, were the bedrock of his character, shaping his business philosophy and his often unseen acts of philanthropy. Today, however, the city's hum felt less like a symphony of success and more like a discordant drone. He was reviewing applications for an entry-level administrative assistant position, a role that typically attracted a deluge of eager, fresh-faced graduates. But one resume, tucked almost apologetically in the middle of the stack, had snagged his attention. Sarah Jenkins. Her qualifications were modest, a patchwork of part-time retail and customer service roles, punctuated by significant gaps. What stood out was the sheer determination etched into her cover letter, a plea for an opportunity that transcended mere professional ambition. It spoke of a need, a profound, urgent need, without ever explicitly stating it. He'd called her in for an interview, against the advice of his HR manager, who preferred candidates with more linear career paths. "Mr. Barnes, her resume is unconventional," Ms. Albright had said, her tone a delicate balance of respect and disapproval. Nick had simply nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes, unconventional is exactly what we need, Ms. Albright." Sarah arrived precisely on time, a feat in itself given the labyrinthine public transport system she'd likely navigated. She was a woman in her early 30s, her frame slender, almost fragile, but her eyes held a fierce, unwavering light. Her clothes, though meticulously clean, were clearly well worn, a testament to careful maintenance rather than recent purchase. A faint tremor in her hands was the only outward sign of the immense pressure she was under, a pressure Nick recognized instantly. It was the pressure of survival, of being the sole pillar holding up a world for others. The interview began conventionally enough. Nick asked about her experience, her skills, her aspirations. Sarah answered with a quiet dignity, her voice soft but clear, her answers thoughtful and articulate. She spoke of her proficiency in basic office software, her organizational skills honed by years of managing a chaotic household, her ability to learn quickly. But as the conversation progressed, the unspoken truth of her situation began to seep into the sterile office air. "Ms. Jenkins," Nick began, leaning forward slightly, his gaze steady and kind. "Your resume shows some gaps. Would you care to elaborate on those?" Sarah's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, which had held such a determined glint, now flickered with a hint of shame, a familiar shadow Nick knew well. "Yes, Mr. Barnes," she said, her voice a little softer now. I'm a single mother. My son, Leo, he had some health issues a few years ago that required a lot of my time. And my daughter, Lily, she's still quite young. Childcare has been a challenge." She didn't elaborate, but she didn't need to. Nick understood. The unspoken words hung in the air, expensive, unreliable, a constant source of anxiety. He saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the faint lines of worry that even her careful makeup couldn't entirely conceal. He saw the fierce love for her children that fueled her every action, every desperate attempt to secure a foothold in a world that seemed determined to push her down. He remembered his own mother, working 2 jobs, her hands raw, her eyes perpetually tired, but always finding a way to put food on the table, to keep a roof over their heads. He remembered the quiet desperation in her voice when the landlord called, the way she'd try to shield him from the harsh realities of their poverty. Sarah Jenkins carried that same weight, that same silent burden. "I understand," Nick said, his voice softer than before. He paused, letting the silence stretch, not to make her uncomfortable, but to give her space. It sounds like you've been through a lot. Sarah nodded, her gaze dropping to her clasped hands. I need a chance, Mr. Barnes. I'm a hard worker. I'm reliable. I learn fast. My children, they deserve a stable home. They deserve to not worry. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, a raw, exposed nerve. She quickly composed herself, lifting her chin, the fierce light returning to her eyes. I can do this job, Mr. Barnes. I know I can. Nick looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw not just a job applicant, but a warrior, a protector, a woman fighting with every fiber of her being for her children. He saw the reflection of a past he'd worked so hard to escape, a past that had forged him into the man he was today. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent battle between Sarah's desperation and Nick's growing empathy. He knew, instinctively, that this was more than just an interview. This was a crossroads, for both of them. He leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. The city hummed outside, indifferent to the quiet drama unfolding within his office. Sarah watched him, her breath held, her future hanging precariously in the balance. If you're moved by stories of resilience and second chances, subscribe to our newsletter for more inspiring content and exclusive updates. Sarah walked out of Barnes Innovations feeling a familiar blend of exhaustion and hollow hope. The interview with Mr. Barnes had been different. He hadn't dismissed her gaps, hadn't looked at her with pity or judgment, but with an unsettling understanding. It was unnerving, almost as if he could see the eviction notice tucked into her worn purse, the empty refrigerator at home, the threadbare shoes on her children's feet. She'd tried to project an image of competence and calm, but the tremor in her hands, the slight catch in her voice, had betrayed her. Back in his office, Nick leaned back, the image of Sarah Jenkins still vivid in his mind. He'd seen countless people in his career, but few had left such an indelible mark. Her quiet dignity, her fierce maternal instinct, her barely concealed desperation, it all resonated with a part of him he rarely acknowledged. He thought of his own mother, Elena, a single mother herself. She'd raised him in a cramped apartment above a noisy diner, working double shifts as a waitress, her hands perpetually smelling of coffee and grease. He remembered the way she'd mend his clothes with meticulous care, stretching every dollar until it screamed, always with a smile, always with a story to distract him from their poverty. But he also remembered the nights he'd hear her crying softly in the kitchen, the hushed phone calls with bill collectors, the way her shoulders would slump when she thought he wasn't looking. One winter, when he was 10, Elena had fallen ill. A severe bout of pneumonia had kept her out of work for weeks. The bills piled up, the landlord threatened eviction, and the refrigerator became a barren landscape. Nick remembered the shame of accepting food from a local charity, the way his mother's eyes had filled with tears of gratitude and humiliation. He remembered the gnawing fear that they would lose everything, that he would be separated from the only person who truly loved him. It was a fear that had driven him ever since, a relentless engine pushing him to succeed, to build a life where such desperation would never touch him or anyone he cared about. Sarah's situation was a mirror of his past. Her son, Leo, had suffered from a rare respiratory condition when he was younger, requiring frequent hospital visits and Sarah's constant presence. Her ex-partner, Mark, a charming but feckless man, had promised support but vanished when the medical bills mounted, leaving Sarah to shoulder the burden alone. Then came Lily, a bright-eyed, curious toddler, a beacon of joy but also another mouth to feed, another life dependent solely on Sarah. She'd worked odd jobs, cleaned houses, waited tables, anything to keep them afloat. But the cost of childcare, especially for a child with special needs, was astronomical. Every time she found a promising job, the logistics of childcare would unravel, forcing her to choose between a paycheck and her children's well-being. The cycle was relentless, a cruel trap that many single mothers found themselves in. Nick picked up Sarah's resume again, his fingers tracing the sparse lines of her work history. He knew, intellectually, that hiring her would be a risk. She lacked the polished experience of other candidates. But he also knew, deep in his gut, that she possessed something far more valuable, an unyielding spirit, a fierce loyalty, and a work ethic forged in the crucible of hardship. These were the qualities that had built Barnes Innovations, the qualities he valued above all else. He thought of his own team. Ms. Albright, his HR manager, was efficient but rigid. His head of marketing, David, was brilliant but lacked empathy. What his company needed, perhaps, was not just another cog in the machine, but a heart, a reminder of the human element behind all the technology. He pictured Sarah's children. Leo, perhaps a quiet, thoughtful boy, still recovering from his illness, looking up to his mother with unwavering trust. Lily, a whirlwind of energy, oblivious to the storm clouds gathering over their small world. He imagined Sarah reading them bedtime stories by the dim light of a single lamp, stretching a meager meal into a feast, whispering reassurances she barely believed herself. A wave of profound empathy washed over Nick. It wasn't pity, it was a deep, visceral understanding. He knew the weight she carried, the silent screams she stifled, the constant fear that gnawed at her. He knew the shame of asking for help, the pride that made it almost impossible. He knew the desperate hope that clung to every potential opportunity, even the smallest one. He closed his eyes, a memory surfacing. His mother, after a particularly grueling shift, collapsing onto the worn sofa, her face pale, her hands trembling. He'd brought her a glass of water, his small hand barely able to hold it steady. She'd smiled, a tired, grateful smile, and pulled him into a hug that felt like the safest place in the world. That hug, that moment of shared vulnerability, had stayed with him. Nick opened his eyes. The decision was forming, not just a business decision, but a human one. He wasn't just offering a job, he was offering a lifeline. He was offering a chance to break the cycle, a chance he wished someone had offered his mother all those years ago. What are your thoughts on the challenges faced by single parents in today's society? Share your perspective in the comments below. The days following the interview stretched into a torturous eternity for Sarah. Each morning, she woke with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, checking her phone for a call that never came. She continued her relentless job search, facing the same polite rejections, the same thinly veiled skepticism about her unconventional resume. The eviction notice, now just a week away, felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She tried to shield Leo and Lily from her worries, but children, with their uncanny perception, sensed the shift in her mood. Leo, usually quiet and observant, asked more questions about their future, his small brow furrowed with concern. Lily, usually a whirlwind of giggles, clung to her mother's leg more often, her bright eyes searching Sarah's face for reassurance. Sarah's resilience was a fragile thing, stretched thin by years of struggle. She'd faced judgment from all sides. The disapproving glances of strangers in the grocery store when her children acted out, the subtle condescension of some social workers, the outright hostility of Mark's family, who blamed her for his disappearance. She'd learned to carry her burdens with a quiet dignity, refusing to let the world see her break. But inside, the cracks were beginning to show. One afternoon, while waiting for a bus, a woman with a perfectly coiffed hairstyle and an expensive handbag tooted loudly as Lily, restless, dropped her toy. "Some people just shouldn't have children if they can't control them," she muttered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah felt a flush of shame, then a surge of anger. She wanted to lash out, to scream about the impossible choices she faced every day, about the sheer exhaustion of trying to be everything for everyone. Instead, she simply picked up the toy, hugged Lily tighter, and stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. Meanwhile, Nick Barnes was facing his own form of judgment. Ms. Albright, his HR manager, had presented him with a meticulously detailed report outlining the risks of hiring Sarah Jenkins. "Mr. Barnes, her employment history is unstable. Her references are from short-term positions. And the childcare issue, it's a significant liability. We have other candidates, highly qualified, with proven track records." Nick listened patiently, his gaze fixed on the cityscape outside his window. He understood Ms. Albright's perspective. It was logical, pragmatic, and entirely devoid of the human element. He knew that in the cutthroat world of business, compassion was often seen as a weakness, a luxury one couldn't afford. But Nick had learned that true strength lay not in ruthless efficiency, but in the ability to see beyond the numbers, to recognize the potential in unexpected places. He thought of his own early days, fresh out of a community college, trying to get his first tech startup off the ground. He'd been dismissed by countless investors, laughed out of boardrooms, told he was too young, too inexperienced, too unconventional. He remembered the sting of those rejections, the feeling of being judged solely on his lack of a prestigious degree or a wealthy family name. It was only through the kindness of an old mentor, a retired engineer who saw his raw talent and unwavering drive, that he'd gotten his first break. That mentor had given him a second chance, not just a job, but a belief in himself when no one else would. That experience had shaped Nick profoundly. He understood that sometimes the most valuable assets weren't listed on a resume, but resided in the heart and spirit of an individual. He saw that same fire in Sarah Jenkins. He saw the potential for loyalty, dedication, and a fierce commitment that would far outweigh any perceived risks. The decision weighed heavily on him. He could play it safe, hire one of the other candidates, and avoid any potential complications. Or he could take a chance, extend a hand, and perhaps, in doing so, offer a redemption not just to Sarah, but to the memory of his own struggles, to the young man he once was who desperately needed a break. He thought about the woman on the bus, the one who had judged Sarah so harshly. He thought about the countless people who, through no fault of their own, found themselves trapped in cycles of poverty and despair, not because they lacked talent or drive, but because they lacked opportunity, a single open door. Nick turned from the window, his expression resolute. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about filling a position. It was about fulfilling a purpose, a quiet promise he'd made to himself years ago, in a cramped apartment above a noisy diner, watching his mother fight for their survival. The decision was made. If this story resonates with you, please consider giving it a like to show your appreciation. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Sarah was trying to coax Lily into eating her meager portion of mashed potatoes. The number was unfamiliar, a corporate-looking sequence. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She answered, her voice a little breathless. "Ms. Jenkins? This is Nick Barnes from Barnes Innovations." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her mind raced, preparing for the polite rejection, the "we've decided to go with another candidate" speech she knew so well. She braced herself, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "I'm calling to offer you the administrative assistant position," Nick said, his voice calm and steady. Sarah froze. The mashed potatoes slipped from Lily's spoon, splattering onto the worn linoleum floor. Sarah barely noticed. I'm sorry, Mr. Barnes. Did you say offer?" "Yes, Ms. Jenkins. We'd like to offer you the position. Full-time, with benefits." A wave of disbelief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. She'd been rejected so many times, had built such a thick wall of expectation against disappointment, that the word offer felt alien, impossible. "But, my resume, my gaps," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Nick chuckled softly. "Ms. Jenkins, we're not just looking at resumes here. We're looking for dedication, resilience, and a willingness to learn. You demonstrated all of that, and more." He paused, then continued, his tone shifting, becoming more personal. "And I understand the challenges you've faced. That's why I want to make sure this opportunity truly works for you." Sarah's breath hitched. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, a genuine concern that went beyond professional courtesy. What do you mean?" "Barnes Innovations has a partnership with a local community center that offers subsidized, high-quality childcare, including programs for children with specific needs," Nick explained. "We can help you secure a spot for Leo and Lily there. The center is conveniently located near our office, and their hours are flexible to accommodate our work schedule." Sarah's eyes welled up. Childcare. The insurmountable hurdle, the invisible barrier that had blocked every path to stability, was suddenly, miraculously, being dismantled. She pictured Leo, thriving in a structured environment, getting the attention he needed. She pictured Lily, laughing and playing with other children, safe and cared for while Sarah worked. Additionally, Nick continued, "We understand that starting a new job can be a financial strain, especially with upfront costs like transportation or new work attire. We'd like to offer you a small advance on your first paycheck to help ease that transition. And we have a mentorship program that will pair you with an experienced team member to ensure you have all the support you need to succeed." The words tumbled out of the phone, each one a stone lifted from Sarah's shoulders. An advance, mentorship, support. It wasn't just a job. It was a complete ecosystem of help, designed to give her not just a foot in the door, but a solid foundation to build a new life. It was an offer so comprehensive, so thoughtful, that it felt almost too good to be true. Mr. Barnes, Sarah managed, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. No one has ever. She trailed off, tears streaming down her face now, silent and hot. Lily, sensing her mother's distress, looked up with wide, concerned eyes. You don't have to say anything, Ms. Jenkins, Nick said gently. Just say yes. We believe in you. We believe you'll be a valuable asset to our team. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to compose herself. The relief was overwhelming, a tidal wave threatening to drown her in its intensity. The weight of the eviction notice, the empty fridge, the constant fear, it all began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning, almost terrifying hope. Yes, she whispered, the word a sacred vow. Yes, Mr. Barnes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Nick smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Welcome to Barnes Innovations, Sarah. We look forward to having you. He gave her instructions for her start date and the next steps for the childcare arrangements. As he hung up, he felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that transcended any business deal or financial gain. He had offered a hand, and it felt like he had lifted a world. Don't miss out on more stories of hope and transformation. Subscribe to our newsletter today for exclusive content and updates. Sarah hung up the phone, her hand still trembling. She stood in the middle of her small, cluttered living room, the receiver clutched to her ear, long after the dial tone had faded. Lily, sensing the shift in her mother's energy, let out a joyful squeal and clapped her hands. Leo, who had been quietly drawing at the kitchen table, looked up, his eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah slowly lowered the phone, her gaze sweeping over her children, then around the familiar, worn room. The peeling paint, the threadbare rug, the stack of overdue bills on the counter. For so long, these had been symbols of her failure, the relentless reminders of her struggle. But now, in this moment, they seemed to shimmer with a different light, the light of a past that was finally, truly, receding. A deep, shuddering breath escaped her, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. It was a breath that carried with it the weight of every sleepless night, every whispered prayer, every tear shed in secret. And as it left her, a profound, almost physical sensation of lightness washed over her. The knot in her stomach, a constant companion for so long, unraveled. The tension in her shoulders, a perpetual brace against the world's harshness, melted away. Her eyes, which had been perpetually shadowed with worry, now shone with an unadulterated, radiant relief. A slow, tentative smile bloomed on her face, starting at the corners of her mouth and spreading, reaching her eyes, crinkling them with genuine joy. It was a smile that hadn't graced her features in years, a smile that spoke of burdens lifted, of hope rekindled, of a future that no longer felt like a dark, impenetrable wall. She sank to her knees, pulling Lily into a fierce hug, then reaching for Leo, who had rushed over. We did it, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. We did it, my loves. Everything's going to be okay. Leo, usually reserved, hugged her back tightly. Lily giggled, burying her face in her mother's hair. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt truly, completely safe. The fear was gone. The desperation had vanished. Only relief remained, pure and overwhelming. Back in his office, Nick Barnes had just finished a video call with Ms. Albright, confirming Sarah's start date and the childcare arrangements. He'd made the necessary adjustments to the budget, authorized the advance, and personally ensured that Sarah would be paired with one of his most supportive team leads. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of having done something profoundly right. He was about to turn to his next task when his phone buzzed. It was a text message from the community center's director, a woman he knew well through his philanthropic work. Just spoke with Sarah Jenkins, the text read. She was in tears of joy, said she hasn't felt this much hope in years. Thank you, Nick. You truly changed her life. Nick read the message, and a strange sensation bloomed in his chest. He pictured Sarah, her slender frame, her determined eyes, the quiet dignity she carried. He imagined her receiving the news, the moment the full weight of the offer, the full scope of the second chance, truly sank in. He saw her relief, her tears of joy, her smile. And then, unexpectedly, a warmth spread through him, a profound emotional release that caught him completely off guard. His own eyes began to prickle. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek. Then another, and another, until silent, hot tears streamed down his face. He wasn't crying out of pity for Sarah. He was crying because he saw in her relief a reflection of his own past, a validation of his own journey. He was crying for the young Nick Barnes, for his mother, for all the times they had felt that same desperate hope, that same overwhelming relief when a kind hand had reached out. He was crying because he understood, intimately, the profound impact of that moment for Sarah, the sheer magnitude of a burden finally lifted. He was crying because, in offering Sarah a second chance, he had, in a way, offered himself a form of redemption. He had taken the pain of his past, the memory of his own struggles, and transformed it into an act of profound compassion. He had closed a loop, healed an old wound, and in doing so, had found a deeper meaning in his own success. The tears flowed freely, a cleansing, cathartic release. They were not tears of sorrow, but of empathy, of connection, of the quiet, powerful joy that comes from truly making a difference. He wiped his eyes, a faint smile on his face. The city hummed outside, but now, to Nick, it sounded like a symphony of possibility. Sarah Jenkins started her new job the following week. She was a quick learner, diligent and fiercely loyal, just as Nick had predicted. Leo and Lily thrived in the community center's programs, their laughter echoing through the halls. The eviction notice became a forgotten relic, replaced by the warmth of a stable home. Nick Barnes continued to build his empire, but he did so with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet understanding that true success was not measured in profits, but in the lives touched, the burdens lightened, and the second chances offered. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, he would remember Sarah's relief, and the tears would well up again, a testament to the enduring power of compassion. Did this story touch your heart? Please like, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring narratives that celebrate the human spirit.